But it is my pleasure to introduce to you our second presenter for this symposium today, and that is Derek T. Mosley. Derek T. Mosley is the Archives Division Manager at the Auburn Avenue Research Library on African American Culture and History, a special library of the Fulton County, Georgia library system. Mr. Mosley is a lover of history and has served in that role for 7 years. Prior to this, he was the assistant head of the Archives Research Center at the Atlanta University Center, Robert W. Woodruff Library. Where have we heard that before? So you know he's going to have some great stuff for us, right? Derek is a founding member of the Atlanta Black Archives Alliance, which works to help families and community archives to preserve their records. He has also served as an elected officer of the Society of American Archivists, or the SAA. In 2023, Mr. Mosley was inducted as a fellow of the Society of American Archivists, the highest bestowed by the organization. That's worth an applause right there, yes. He graduated from Simmons University with an MS in Archives Management and Morehouse College with a BA in History. So without further ado, I present Mr. Derek T. Mosley.
Everyone, thank you so much for that wonderful welcome and intro. I'm so happy to be here this morning to talk about the collections at the Auburn Avenue Research Library on African American Culture and History, which I will just call AARL going forward. But I wanted to give you all an overview of some of our collection strengths, some of those collections, and a little bit on the history of the build of the library itself. So the Auburn Avenue Research Library Archives preserves and makes available the unique historical records of enduring value related to African American culture and history, with a main focus on local Atlanta history, and then spreading out to Georgia, the Southeast, the South, and then the world. So most of our collections are tailored towards local Atlanta history, but we have quite a few. Currently, we have over 300 archives collections. A little bit about the history of the library. The Auburn branch opened in Atlanta in 1921. It was the first branch for Black citizens in the city of Atlanta. It was the only branch. So it opened in 1921 with the work of faculty from the AUC. So they worked hard to make sure there was funding for a circulating collection in the city of Atlanta, right on Auburn Avenue. It's set right where the King Center sits. It was a red brick building, and in that collection, and in that building, there was a small Black history collection. So there were books and other things on Black history, which actually make up the core of what we have currently in our collection. So this building and this branch opened in 1921, and the first professional staff member started in 1932, and that was Mrs. Annie L. McFeeters. And so Mrs. McFeeters worked at this branch as well as the West Hunter branch until the early 1960s, when in 1968, she became the first Black librarian at Georgia State University. And so she worked there until she retired. So we have her personal papers as well as some records of this branch in our collection. So with that small Black history collection, it moved around the city. It went from this branch to the West Hunter branch to the Central Library in the 1970s, and then now in our branch, which is the Auburn Avenue Research Library. So the first set of records I want to talk about are family papers. Family papers are very core to research. So these are collections that different people have given us on their family. So these will include photographs, documents that are relating to the family history, records of schools, of birth records, death records, all these types of things that are part of your family records. And so these people have given us their records as part of our archives. I like to point out the Portia Allen Hunt papers because Mrs. Hunt went through each photo and gave us a clear description of each person in her family. So the actual item has the photo, but then it gives the full history of the people in the family. So these are nurses, and this was herself. She put when she was born and where, and all of the places she worked and where she went to school. So for each photo in this collection, she actually did that. So this is a great resource for anyone who is looking at this family, but also just just blacks in Georgia. So if somebody was really wanting to know, where the schools were and how nurses were actually trained, they could look at this collection. We also have the Pitts family papers, which has a lot of photos that are mostly named and written on with the names of the family members. So these are records that were left for the public in general to be able to utilize. So I would always recommend or ask that you think about collecting your papers and giving them to a local archives or library as a way to making sure that these records are actually available for research in the future. These are more photos from the Pitts family. And as I mentioned on the back of the photos, someone wrote actually what the photo was. So this is the actual AME convention, but it doesn't have a year. Recently, we actually received the Sistrunk Denson papers, which this is a family, a wife and a husband, and both sides of their family. These are photos and documents that relate to both sides of their family, and they also are identified. I'll take a break here to just say, please identify your photos. If you have time, if you have breaks in, as you're, watching TV and lounging, if you take your photos and start to actually put names and info on them, it will be great. Not, those items don't have to end up in archives, but just for future generations. So they'll know who all these people are in these photos. It's one of the hardest things working in archives to have thousands upon thousands of unidentified photos. So you could come in and say, do you have a photo of my uncle who was born in Atlanta in 1942 and he went to this school? We may. Would you like to look through the thousands of unidentified photos to see if your uncle is in those photos? So I always like to say that if you have time and if you have the memory to actually write down the names of the people in the photos and also the dates if you know. So if you know it's the 1970s, write the 1970s, just so people have a reference point as to what they're looking at. This is a list of our other family papers collections. These are mainly very small collections where one person in a family has actually given us a set of records. We also have a collection of family reunion books. So people who have compiled those histories, they will give us a copy of it for our records so that if anybody else wants to see it, it is available in the library. We also have a collection of enslaved and legal documents. These are documents that are from throughout the South. These were all purchases throughout the years that we've made from different book sellers and book dealers. There are approximately 100 different items in this collection. It's a very small collection and very spread out. But most of the documents are either wills from the slave owners or the bill of sale of enslaved people. And we have them arranged by county. So most of the records are either from Georgia or South Carolina. Yes.
Digitize and index those?
Not at this time. But there is a full list of the documents online. So if you go to our website, you're able to see exactly what counties and also what dates they are. Mhm. I can show that to you all. Is there internet? Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. So to find us, you can either go to the Fulton County website or you can just type in Auburn Avenue Research Library. That takes you to our homepage. You haven't heard, all the libraries are suffering with our cyber security breach. So there's a ton of messages telling you not to come if you need the internet. But you can still use the internet if you have it at your home. And you can go to the archives tab, which is at the top. And this gives you some information on the archives. And you can go to archival finding aids. And here you can either do a list search of all the collections, which go from A through Z, or you can do a keyword search. So if I typed in enslaved, it will bring me that collection. And this is the finding aid, which lists all of the documents that are in this collection. And we tried to give as much information as we could for each document. So it gives a pretty detailed entry of what the document is. And you can do that for all of our collections. Yes, ma'am.
An interest to receive more bills of sales and slavery wills.
Yes, ma'am. We are always accepting of documents. Yes, ma'am. So one of our main collection strengths is the civil rights movement. We have over 30 collections that deal with the civil rights movement. And the first collection that I'll talk about is our Andrew J. Young papers. The Andrew Young collection is our most heavily used collection of records. It's over 600 boxes, and it spans Ambassador Young's entire career, from his childhood to his time in college, to his time with SCLC, his time in the House of Representatives, his time as ambassador, his time as mayor, and his time as co-chair of the 1996 Olympics. So this collection is heavily used when people are looking at the history of Atlanta, different events that were happening, as well as just his career in general. It also has his sermons, his notes, as well as about 10,000 photographs, which also are not identified. So these are some examples of some of the photos, him and his wife, Jean Childs Young, him during his time in President Carter's administration, whenever he ran for governor and for Congress. We have those records, and as well as his civil rights involvement. So this is the actual program from the March on Washington that he has in his collection. We also have the papers of Donald L. Hollowell, who was a noted attorney during the civil rights movement and throughout the 20th century. So we have his legal records as well as personal papers and documents that relate to his work as a local attorney. Included in his collection is a bail receipt for Dr. King, that him and A.T. Walden bailed him out. And I think this was 1962, if I'm not mistaken. We also have the papers of Hosea L. Williams. And this is also a heavily used collection that spans his time as a civil rights leader, as well as his ventures into politics and business. And it also has a lot of photographs as well. We also have records from the Southern Regional Council. And this collection is mostly clippings and actual pubs that were actually sent out. So it spans many different topics. This collection has about 500 boxes of clippings and other printed items that deal with either the civil rights movement as well as other issues that were facing Black citizens. So these are some examples of some of the clippings and other items that are found in this collection. We also have the records of the NAACP Atlanta branch. And this collection spans roughly 40 years and covers the time that Dr. Samuel Williams was the president, all the way to John Dale Johnson in the early 1990s. So the records document their push towards fighting for the creation of MARTA and the lawsuits that they filed when the train went through the Black neighborhoods, as well as the Atlanta school system during the desegregation of the 1960s. This is a memo that was written whenever they were writing to stop the MARTA from expanding through those Black neighborhoods. They filed multiple lawsuits trying to stop it. We also have the records of the Center for Democratic Renewal, which started off as the Anti-Klan Network in the 1960s, and it was founded by Reverend C.T.V. Have their complete set of records from their creation until they shut down in 2008. And they have lots of newsletters and reports on the KKK and other white supremacist groups in the U.S. Worked very hard to document the Black church burnings in the 1990s. So now I'm going to go into some of our church collections, which are the collections that are given to us by churches or by pastors and other religious leaders. We have the records of Paradise Missionary Baptist Church, which is in Southeast Atlanta. This is their last name that they have, but they also were called the Reed Street Baptist Church, and they had a couple other names. So we have a set of records from the church that dates back to the 1920s and goes all the way up until 2019, when they turned, I think it was 150. So these are some photos and programs that are in the collection from the church. So this is another plug that I can give for if you have church history books where you do your yearbook and your things with all of the different organizations in the church. It is a good thing to actually give those to an archive so that they can have it and can also share it with the public. We also have records from First Congregational Church, which is on Cortland, right down the street from the library. We have a set of records from them that date back to the 1870s. Photos and even their first deed to that church. We also have the personal papers of Dr. Barbara L. King, and she's the founder of Hillside United Truth Center. So we have her sermon notes, her photographs, books, and other materials that relate to her ministry. And she was the first Black woman to found a church in the city of Atlanta. We also have the records of Edward Randolph Carter, E.R. Carter, and Andrew Jackson Lewis. Reverend Carter was the pastor of Friendship Baptist Church for over 70 years. And his grandson was Andrew Jackson Lewis, who was a local principal and Boy Scout leader. So we have records from both of them. And he also wrote a very popular book in the early 1900s called The Black Side, which was the first history of Black Atlanta. So it really gives you that real original document of the churches, the groups, and the people that were prominent in Atlanta. Yes. Yes.
Didn't get the question.
I said that I asked if E.R. Carter Elementary School was named after him.
Yeah.
And also on this program, you have a Mrs. M. Atlas Jones, and that's an elementary school as well.
Yes, she mentioned that there is a E.R. Carter Elementary School in the city of Atlanta, and this program also mentions M. Agnes Jones, which is also a school in APS. We also have the papers of Henry and Florine Furlow, which they were both teachers in the city of Atlanta, and they created the Heaven Bound play that is done every year at Big Duffield. So they wrote and produced the play for the first, I think, 45 years of its inception, and there are photos and documents that relate to the production of Heaven Bound.
Is it 100 or 99?
I think it turned 100 last year. And so we also have a general collection of church history. So these are booklets and programs and other things from different churches throughout the U.S. Mostly they are from churches in Georgia, but there are some churches that are outside of Georgia in Alabama, Mississippi, South Carolina, and North Carolina. And these are all booklets and things that were given to us as part of different people wanting to have something on their church in the archives. And there's a full listing online of all the churches that are documented in this church history collection. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
You would contact me and we would have a conversation. I also have a number of collections that deal with Atlanta Black-owned businesses, the largest of which is the records of the Atlanta Life Insurance Company. We have over 400 boxes of records from the life insurance company dating back to its founding all the way up until it moved out of the main building on Auburn Avenue to Peachtree in the early 2000s. We also have over 100 ledgers of payments of people paying on their policies that are very detailed in terms of how of of the people as well as the price of each premium. And they date back from 1910 till about the 1960s when they started to have other record keeping practices. And most of the collection is the financial records as well as the of the actual officers. So the president, the vice president, and the treasurer. So these are the types of records that are found in the Atlanta Life Insurance Company. We also have a number of researchers that will come in looking for the involvement of the life insurance company in the civil rights movement. And so those records, you kind of have to search and kind of figure out what they paid for in terms of trying to help with the civil rights movement. But that is also of this collection. And we also have a lot of the Atlanta Life Insurance calendars that will come out every year. So this is just one example of the calendars that were sent out to all of the members of the Atlanta Life Insurance Company.
Those are all employees?
Yes, these were employees, and most of them, these are branch managers. So, you know, there were branches throughout the South of the Atlanta Life Insurance Company. And so these are the managers that were spread out throughout the South. So we also have the records of Evelyn Frazier, who was the owner of Frazier's Cafe Society, which was on West Hunter Street, which is MLK. And we have her records from her business as well as her personal records. And this is an example of a menu from her restaurant. And this one is the early 1960s. I always like to point out that a children's plate was 75 cents and it came with chicken, vegetables, and milk for 75 cents. And in her collection, she also had the Graham Jackson room, which was in her restaurant. And we also have Graham Jackson's personal papers in the archives. And Graham Jackson was the organist for FDR. And he also worked at Booker T. Washington as the band director. And of particular note in this collection is Evelyn Frazier was a lifelong Republican. So her collection documents her work in the party. So she was a very important figure in terms of Blacks in the party. She has letters from Nixon, Reagan, Bush, and most of the Republican presidents. And she stayed a Republican all the way through her life. So we also have a small set of records that relate to the radio station WERD and Paul E.X. Brown, who was one of the workers and one of the DJs at the radio station. We also document African Americans and in education. I'll start off with the Ruby Parks Blackburn papers. Mrs. Parks Blackburn was a pioneer in Black women voting. She started the League of Black Voters in the 1950s. And she also taught school training sessions on how to use the polling machines to Black citizens. And she was a licensed beautician. And her group also worked with the Dixie Hills bus boycott in the 1950s. Yes, she kept a small set of documents on the bus on the bus boycott and the aftermath. Well, I also have the records of Selena Sloan Butler. And Selena Sloan Butler was one of the early graduates of Spelman. She graduated, I believe, in 1887. And she was married to the first Black doctor on Auburn Avenue, Dr. Henry Butler. And she founded the Colored Parent Teacher Association of Georgia. So it was the first PTA for actual Black students and parents. And she worked throughout her life to really get parents as well as students in the state of Georgia on the same page. And she also advocated for funding and other things related to the schooling of Blacks in the city. We also have the records of Jean Charles Young, who was a teacher and educator in the city of Atlanta and throughout the U.S. She also was on President Carter's year of the child in 1979, and she worked throughout the city in terms of education. She also was on the board at the Science Museum, Sci Trek, and the Apex. And so this is a totally separate collection from her husband, Andrew. This only documents her work and her career in education. We also have the papers of Dr. Hornsby, who was a professor at Morehouse for over 45 years and was also one of the longest serving editors of the Journal of African American History. We also have a set of records from the Conclave of Grady Graduate Nurses, which was the Black nursing school at Grady Hospital. So there was a Black school and a white school. The Black school started in the early 1920s and went all the way through the 1960s. And so it was a separate school. They had their own instructors and were separated from the white nursing students. And so this is a collection of records that the nurses gave to us. So each nurse that wanted to participate in this collection gave us photos, their textbooks, their writings, all types of materials on their time as a Grady graduate nurse. The earliest record is 1923, I believe, and it goes through the early 2000s at their, they would have gatherings every other year. It was actually at the hospital. Yes. I think it's one of the buildings that's slated to be torn down. It's one of the, yeah, it's still there. Okay. Okay, thank you.
They had a different color uniform. Yeah, the white nurses had blue.
And we actually, thank you. And we also have two sets of the uniforms and the hats that one of the nurses did give us. We also have a large collection of arts and community in Atlanta, including the National Black Arts Festival records from its inception all the way until the mid 2010s. So there are the commemorative plates, the brochures, the photos, and the planning of each National Black Arts Festival. We also have records from the Neighborhood Arts Center, which was one of the things that was brought out during the mayoral time of Maynard Jackson. And it has photos and other documents that relate to the Arts Center. We also have a large set of records that deal with African American groups, including the 100% Wrong Club, which was a club of the sports writers at the Atlanta Daily World, where they would work on the outcome of games, like they would guess who would win, and so they called themselves the 100% Wrong Club. And here's just a short list of some of the other collections that we have. Yes, sir.
I didn't realize we had donated documents to you, but that's good.
Yes, there was a group of class. We have all of the reunion photos from each of the reunions starting from 1971 all the way to the last one that was held. And the class actually came in and identified each person that was in the class.
Have gone, so it sort of fizzled out.
Mm-hmm.
Just a few are left.
Yeah, and so when we first got this collection, I went to the Macy's meeting room at Greenbrier Mall. Yeah, and that's where we had this whole thing where they brought the collection down.
Question, and it may not be appropriate for you to answer the question, but anyone who may be interested, I'm looking at all of this history, and this is research. And I wonder how many people are preserving this history as far as like the buildings and all that's down on Auburn Avenue. When I pass through there, I'm saddened because they look like they died with people who were there, who built them up. And the National Heritage Trust has lots of money to keep advocating for funding. And you see in other places where other people are using that funding to preserve this history. And you have the paperwork to justify that, but you do have to do the National Historic Registry. I know Dr. King's home and Ebenezer and all of those are historic sites, but many of these others need to be as well, because like this gentleman say here, most of the people in this class may have died. Who's going to know that they ever existed if we don't do those, that preservation and get with the National Heritage Trust Fund, which is a national fund that has money available to help do that. So we need people like architects who can kind of draw out the plan and we are historians. I'm an odds member. So we're historians, so we can pull it together, and you already have the information. So yes. I'm just making that as a
statement.
Sort of like an appeal, to say, we want to remember when they're not here anymore. And our children and our grandchildren would want to remember when we're not here anymore. And so I just make that as an appeal or knowledge. And I do I am familiar with writing a nomination for the National Registry. I've done a couple of them before from my hometown church, and cemetery. But that's the first step, is to do that and then go in there and send it to the National Heritage Fund and tell them you want this money to renovate Auburn Avenue. This is so, so precious.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You. We have one of those restoration grants.
Bethel, Amy did. Yes, that was the church listing from the National Heritage, but there are other categories other than the Black churches. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Paula, because that is something that everybody should know, that money is there available. And then They also have these preservation conferences. One is coming up, I think, at the end of March, 1st of April in DC. If we're not at the table, we don't know where the money is. And when I worked in my previous profession, our thing was always follow the money. Find out where the money is and then see what programs it is that they have available. And you already have the gem, and that's the research. And we're going to have a new member here. She's back there somewhere. She can vouch for me. You know what I'm talking about, right? Okay.
And so here are a couple of photos from some of our records that deal with different organizations. The Utopian Literary Club is one of the oldest Black book clubs in the U.S. They celebrated 100 years in 2016, and they are a continuing group over the last 100 years. They haven't stopped meeting since they first met in 1916. The Utopian Literary Club, 1916.
Thank you.
One of the oldest. One of the oldest. This is a photo of the members of the 100% Wrong Club. We also have records on the LGBTQ plus community in Atlanta and throughout the U.S. We have a collection of print items, magazines, flyers, and other items that deal with Black LGBTQ history. But I wanted to talk a bit about our Atlanta African American Funeral Program collection, which was a partnership between the Research Library AUGS, as well as the Wesley Chapel Genealogy Group and the can't read it. Yeah, and yeah, I said that. Yes. But over the last 5 years, with the real work of Tamika Strong, who really came up with this program, we're able to make available over 3,000 Black funeral programs. And so they are available free of charge on the Digital Library of Georgia. And you can print them out, you can make copies, you can use them for whatever research you need. And since that time, we have received quite a bit of more programs that people have either mailed in, dropped off, that we are almost ready to do another batch of funeral programs. So, so it's very important if you have programs and you want them to be taken care of, you want to make sure that you either give them to AUGS, to us, or to the Wesley Chapel group, so that we can get them all online eventually. Yes, ma'am. Both. So you can search by year, you can search by name, you can search by cemetery, you can search by city, you can search by church. There are a number of ways for you to find if we have that funeral program. I'll take you there. Yes. We haven't yet, but that's definitely on our list, is to reach out to all of the funeral homes to see what type of records we could get and collaborate with. No, ma'am. You can search from institutions, go down to Auburn Avenue. Atlanta Funeral Program Collection. Here are all the programs, and you can click on them, and there's a full copy of the program. Yes, ma'am. Anywhere that you have internet access. Yes. So we called it the Atlanta Collection, but it actually covers the majority of the state as well as some other states. So there are programs from South Carolina, North Carolina, Illinois, New Jersey, California. And as you look at them, you can kind of tell, people have family everywhere. So when people die, either they come home or you go to the funeral there. So they are spread out throughout the U.S. Yes, ma'am. Yes, there are, in the state of Georgia, there are about 6 other collections of programs. The first one being the Augusta Richmond collection. So that documents the city of Augusta and that region. There's also one, help me out, Tamika. She's talking. Do you remember where the other ones are?
There is Evans County, and then there's also one from Willow Hill, which is in sub. So there are at least 5 different collections on the Digital Library of Georgia that are focused on African American Creole programs. And the collection policy, that's the official term. There was only that the person was born. And Auburn Avenue was the only choice because they have an international collecting policy. So there was no other place where we want to put those programs except working on those. But if you have some to donate, you can contact me, you can contact Derek, and we will make sure that they're placed on Auburn Avenue and hopefully make it into the next batch. Oh, for this collection was because our elders are the ones who keep them, right?
Right.
So the elders have to in order to keep them, we need y'all help to get them into Auburn so that we can protect them because even though we know that the funeral program might have some drama going on with it, there is still things that will help a person get started with their genealogy. And so we need to collect our own collection. So that's the reason why we created this, to serve as a foundation or a starting point for African Americans researching their history. So y'all play your part. Give us the program. We'll take clean. When I say clean, I want to be able to see the information on it. I say copies, but if you have empty copies of your written, what you will give. So you make them whatever you give us, we don't keep. In the beginning, we went through, we'll bronze them and return them. It became chaotic. So whatever you give us, you won't get back.
And you can also just get it off the internet once it's digitized, so you can just print it out. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Yes. So there is there is a large one in Texas out of the San Antonio Public Library. library system. There was one woman in the city that collected, I think it was over 5,000 programs, and she gave them all to the library, and they digitized those. So that's one set, and I believe there's another either set coming or being planned in the Chicago area through the Vivian Harsh Library. Yes, ma'am. No, they could be anybody. Anybody Black. Anybody Black. Oh, yes.
You said, suggested though. After you've labeled the names of the pictures, how do you know?
So I like to have a conversation with you, and then we'll go from there. And I mean, this is a good time to say, not everything is worth keeping. So, we have to have a conversation about what it is that we want to keep and preserve for the next generation. We don't want your old Jets. We don't want your old Ebonies. We don't want a whole bunch of books that are out of print or out of date unless they're rare. But photos, letters, documents that are important to, telling the story of you or of a group of people or of a neighborhood. Those are the types of things that we're looking for. But I always want to be open to having a conversation, just so, we're all on the same page. And so these are some more examples of the programs that were digitized. And I believe the oldest program that we had from this batch was 1896. And the most current one was 2019. So we have a number of collections that we've recently opened for research. Cynthia A. McKinney, who was in the House of Representatives, we have all of her congressional records. Howard Baugh, who was one of the first Black police officers in the city of Atlanta, one of the first 8. His papers have been processed. The Jesse O. Thomas papers. Jesse Thomas was the founder of the Atlanta School of Social Work, as well as one of the first employees of the National Red Cross and the Urban League. We have records from the Christians for Change Baptist Church, the Kathleen Hawk papers, the Nancy Boxell papers, and the Jean Charles Young Institute for Youth Leadership. So these are all collections that have been open for research in the last year or so. Yes, ma'am. It depends on the size and on the staffing that we have. So some collections, if it's a small collection, it could be done quicker. If it's a large collection, it could be years. Yes. Yes, we do take volunteers. And I think I'm almost to my last slides, but these are a list of our oral history collections. These oral history collections were done in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, either Black citizens or of different neighborhoods in the city. Some were done at the Central Library in the 1970s, as well as some were done in the 90s with the Atlanta Preachers, which is the Atlanta Interfaith Broadcasters Oral History Collection. So those are mostly they interviewed local pastors in the 1990s. So that has a lot of your prominent ministers before they passed away. So these oral histories are only available in the reading room. You have to come in and listen to them. They're not online. Mhm. So we don't, but the Atlanta Housing Authority has its own archives and archivists. So they keep their own records. So they would most likely be there. Mhm. That is a very common mistake. We do not have the yearbooks. Those yearbooks are still at APS. They now have the archives back open. So if you need a yearbook, you should contact the APS archives. We have some issues of different yearbooks from the Black high schools, but it is nowhere near a complete set. Yes. Oh, they actually just reopened. Yes, ma'am.
Like the first African American people, the first is I interviewed Alexi the eight either as the first African American female bricklayer in Georgia or in the city of Atlanta. So I can't remember what it was, but I do know that I was on a television called Focus something, you know. And I was young. I didn't have no idea about, what all this stuff meant, but I was the lead mason on the construction site. And we built the projects, some of the projects, in Atlanta, college and places like that. And I got fired because I was a distraction. Because they didn't have any, female bricklayers. And people would come and guys would stand. I got into a fight because I was underdone for about 2 months and they didn't know that I was a girl. And the guy brushed me on the construction site and I thought he was being fresh and I went ballistic. And then he turned around and I'm fussing and he's yelling, "It's a girl, yeah, it's a girl." I had no idea, that there was a big deal. But they used to come and stand there around the construction site. I think I was with either Apple builder or Colquitt. And that's when I got fired because I was too big of a distraction on job site. So I was just wondering, I was just wondering, how do you find it, information like that, or even document?
It's most likely not documented. It's kind of hard to figure out who was the first of anything. Sometimes it's just passed down that, oh, this person was the first. And that's why we need records to be able to prove whether or not someone was the first of whatever it is. Yes, ma'am.
They date back to the 1940s in Atlanta, where they go back to 20, down in Pike County and stuff. But my dad talked about when Maynard got in, everybody put on the fourth Maynard Jackson, and this company was able to get contracts to renovate the public housing. And so for the first time, Daddy had to hire women.
Okay.
And he talked about that, and he said how the women were more reliable to his rates. Why women to get paid on Saturday morning or Friday, and they would come back to work the next day. Men wouldn't come back. So that was the whole big thing. Because when I was a little girl, I said, "Oh, I'm gonna work with Daddy." My brothers went because I don't know no girls on the job.
Right.
But he learned, not that I wanted to be out there. But he said that they had to hire women, and because that was the prerequisite to get the contract. But the reason why I was asking you, because you would definitely remember that I did give you about 30 or 40 blueprints.
And we have those processed and they are open for research. There's a find day online for them.
Yeah, these were built and owned by Black people. That Watley Brothers Construction Company, a Black company. Many times, usually, I can't remember Robinson's name, but he was like the first Black architect, using his work. And so they date back to the 40s, then the war came back after the war. And they also trained Herman Russell, but Herman Russell exceeded them in business. My dad did not become a multi-millionaire.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I understand. I'm hearing. So this would be the last question so that we can
Get ready for the lunch break.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have the Butler Street Y that you spent on the Wednesday series of speakers? Do you have any?
Oh, man. I would guess that maybe the Atlanta History Center may have them, but we don't have them at all. And so here's a list of our other digital collections that you could get to from the Digital Library of Georgia. Most of these deal with Blacks in Education, which was one of our themes that we did for a grant project. So these are freely available online. The entire collection, you can look at each item online. For other digital items, you can look at the Digital Library of Georgia, Umbra, African American Search, and the Digital Public Library of America. Those are all great sources of Black digital content. And I thank you for your time.